That was a good show.
I think we're getting better and better at this.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Tom Nardi, managing editor at Hackaday.
This is episode 200. Happy New Year, the ultimate Game Boy, and Python all the things. Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! New Year of hacks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. 2022 it actually wasn't a bad year for Hackaday and for hacks. It was just a bad year for everything else.
Yeah, right. Everything else in the world.
But our little corner of the world actually did super, I'd say. We'll talk more about like year in review stuff, but it was so nice to be back at SuperCon again.
Absolutely.
And, the hacks just keep flowing. Also, this is episode number 200. For those of you Hackaday podcast trivia fans out there, it's our 201st episode because of zero indexing.
Yeah, not to be confusing or anything.
I love it. I love it. We get to celebrate. Last week, Christina and I celebrated our 200th episode, and this week we'll celebrate episode 200.
I mean, I guess you could make an argument this is the 200th proper episode. Right, because the original was like a year in review, and I think at that point it wasn't even super clear if it was going to be a regular thing, right?
Yeah, with a little bit of podcast history, Mike was like, let's do a year in review podcast thing, and we'll see if it goes anywhere. We'll see if we have fun with it and want to do it again, basically. And we did, and we were like, hey, that was kind of good. Let's try. And boom, a podcast was born.
Sort of for my own purposes, but who knows? I mean, it might be something useful for us anyway. I spent some time the last week or so cataloging all the episodes and downloading them, so I have like a local mirror. And I even went back, like probably no one is going to notice, but I even went back to like the first 20 or 30 articles on the site and made sure like the episode numbers are consistent, because at like one point they used to be like the word episode and then a number, and then there was like EP, and then there was like a dash instead of for the 3 people in the world who might be concerned. Now all 200 and about to be 201 episodes have consistent episode naming, and I wrote a Python script to scrape the site so that I could see who hosted each one and then make the ID3 tags accurate.
Ooh, nice.
Which was easy for like the first 80 because it was just you and Mike, although like Dan and myself stepped in a couple times. But then this last year it's been tricky because it changes every week.
Yeah.
So I had a little script that grabs the first paragraph of each podcast article and then matches our names.
Oh,
and then it inserts that into the ID3 tag. So we now have like the definitive copy of all the episodes and with proper tagging for something. I mean, maybe so that if you're playing it, it'll actually say Elliot Williams and Dan Maloney or whatever.
I see. I just put us under our band name. Hackaday.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, in honor of episode 200, I thought I'd let you all in on a little bit of super deep Hackaday podcast trivia. You know how in the beginning of the show, we always throw in a couple random sounds from the show? It sounds like a clever thing to do, right? You'd think we would have invented that on purpose. But no, the very first podcast I edited, I was using super old technology. I was actually using an old like multi-track recorder. And I actually had audio of Mike and I like talking to each other in exactly the right place so that when I put the music in there, it kind of sounded good and worked along with it. And then I'm like, oh, I'm just leaving it. I'm not going to blank that out. I'm not going to cut that part out of the track. That was cool. Because it was like, I'm like, you ready to go? And Mike's like, yeah, sure. Or something like that, right? And I was like, oh, that's good. We're like hyping ourselves up for it. I'm leaving that in. And that is how Bug became feature.
There you go. A peek behind the curtain.
200 episodes. We'll have to think up some other crazy little glitch and incorporate it into the next 200. Well, you ready for What's That Sound?
Yeah, I've even downloaded it ahead of time, so I don't have to fumble around like a fool.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, should I give it a listen?
Go for it.
All right, here we go. This is spooky.
I made it extra short because I thought it was too easy. Have
too
I
easy.
screwed up?
Well, no, I'm sure there's many people screaming right now at me. I mean, certainly a game, certainly walking around. I want to say shot in the dark like Diablo.
I almost did Diablo, actually. I was actually looking for a good Diablo sounds. I'm not going to lie.
Something along those lines, I guess.
But this is all going to get cut. I'll tell you what it is.
Oh, wow.
That's
Really? What? You got me on that one.
Yoo-hoo! Well, those of you listening out there, if you know what the sound is, you'll find a form at hackaday.com/podcast. Fill in the form with your handle and best guess, and we'll pick from among the right answers, and someone will get a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. Boom. Mission accomplished. All right, let's start off the new year with some hacks with a 7-video series by Stephen Bennett. DIY lamp hides cables between the seams. And this is a project to rebuild some kind of Dyson lamp. I don't know. I actually didn't know what this was until I watched the video. It's a particularly slick LED-based lamp design. The thing basically is a cross and it pivots around. If you think of those like classic swing arm lamps, this is like that, but with no wires and with, hyper fancy tech. And that's basically the point of this project, is that Steven is trying to reproduce a lot of the like super high end, I guess he says it costs $600 or something, lamp effects on a hacker budget. I don't know. After watching these videos, A, he's getting really close, and I love his incredible attention to detail. But B, he's probably easily $600 into parts and equipment at this point. Like, this is not one of those things where DIY is going to get you a cheaper one. On the other hand, of course, he's open sourcing all of the designs and the files and the code and just everything. So once he's done with the hard work, you can probably make one yourself for, certainly under $100. Some of the gimmicks here are he's using 2020 rails and, those rollers that go into the slots on them. I guess he's using open builds rails, actually, to make the kind of cross frame here. And the video we featured is about how to make it so that the wiring's invisible. And when you adjust the thing, when you lift it up or down, the horizontal beam has to travel up the vertical beam. And you think about that wiring challenge, and it's a hard one. The way Dyson handles it is actually with having a track with 2 contacts that goes vertically up the main one, and then a magnetic kind of sliding coupler on the horizontal piece that mates to this. So they don't have to run any wires at all. Steven's solution in this video, anyway, is to make the world's cutest little super mini drag chains that are so small that he's able to fit them into the little, whatever those are, gully in the 2020 rail. Slip it into that little notch there. And he actually does print in place, so he doesn't even have to worry about hinging all 6,000 of these together. He only has to do them in a few segments. It's a really sweet solution. It's not perfect. And I went back and watched a bunch of his earlier videos, and he's been through this before where he's like, here, I've got it working. And then he's like, the next video, he's like, I'll do this better. And my feeling is he's going to do that again here. So if you're interested in this kind of hyper obsessive, making everything perfect design procedure, this is a really great series to watch because he's going through all the different iterations. And, this is where he refines the carriage. First, he did a counterweight and it had too much friction. So then he went to 2040 rail and put the counterweight on wheels. And then he's like, it looks too thick. I'm going to work on the counterweight some more. And then he works on the counterweight, and instead of having it slide up and down the little track on a solid piece of printed plastic, he puts a slight living hinge into that clip. And so it rides over the bumps and makes it a lot less frictiony. And he can get away with using 2020 again and stuff. It's really, he's dotting every I and crossing every T on this project.
I hadn't seen the lamp either, so I'm glad you said that.
Good.
I was worried this was going to be everyone knows about me, right? But, going on the Dyson site, it's remarkable how much it actually does look like the DIY version. I kind of
Right?
thought like the exposed wheels and everything were some concession to make it simpler. Like, no, that's really what it looks like with these little rollers. I mean, it even looks like they're using aluminum extrusion, at least for the central one.
They're
Like
using
in this,
some kind of
something
custom,
like it.
They're using a
Yeah.
custom aluminum extrusion, it looks like.
But close enough that, at first glance, it's like, yeah,
Yep.
sure, 2020 will fit in there.
Yep.
And yeah, for $600. Although, what do you expect for Dyson? I like in the pictures too. Everybody's so happy with their Dyson lamp, and in the background they got like the Dyson fans too, because you have to have they all got you got to have the whole family. You can't just get the lamp for $600.
I mean, if you're already that person spending like $400 on a fan, you gotta be spending $600 on a lamp, right?
And this thing's called the light cycle. I would have thought like Tron had trademarked that back in the day.
Jumping on them about
Yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising how the movement in this is really just kind of V-shaped wheels in rails on, like an Ender printer or something. It is kind of true in both designs that's the shtick here. It's making use of those wheels. Although I do have to say, early on in one of them, he shows that the Dyson version has a spring-loaded third wheel where if you've tweaked one of these Ender printers, it's got an eccentric cam, and you kind of have to tune it just right. Like you have to dial in the pressure so that there's no slop, but it's not like compressing the wheel so that it runs with friction. Dyson's clever solution to this that I think is the no fuss solution is you just preload that thing with a heavy enough spring so that you don't have to tweak it yourself. And that's one of the things that Steven makes a compromise on. He does his with an eccentric cam, just like an Ender 3D printer, basically. If you're doing it yourself and you know how to tune that up, then I think he's made the right choice. It's a lot simpler than putting in a spring mechanism. Even if I do have to say the spring's pretty sweet. Like, I like constant force when it's applied by springs more than I do when it's applied by, like, squishing things or set screws or something like that.
Now, the write-up doesn't seem to say it, but do we know, is Steven also trying to replicate, like, the software side of it, or is this just the mechanics of moving the light around? That seems to be the only thing that the Dyson light really does. And man, they're talking about trying to stretch a point. Like, you go down there and it says, so basically there's an app and it communicates to the lamp over Bluetooth and it will set the light level for, okay, it's time for bed or it's time to study. But it even says, like, there's an age adjust mode. And it says, put your age in there and it will set the recommended brightness for how old you are, which I didn't even know was a thing.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, really. And they had this, like, gray-haired, distinguished gentleman using it versus the young people in all the other pictures.
That's awesome.
Is it brighter the older you get, and until it's dark? I don't know.
Marketing shtick, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, right?
I don't know if he's done that yet. The firmware right now is very simple. It's just kind of Arduino doing PWM. The one thing that he has played around with is the PWM frequency, because when he finally got the electronics together in like episode 5 or something, he noticed that it had flicker. It does that thing where the flicker interferes with the camera shutter, right? So you can't take videos with the thing. And so he bumped up the PWM frequency to like 4 kilohertz. And then he's like, but it makes the constant current LED driver hum or sing. And so he's like, this sounds horrible, but it looks good. The options are to slow it down and have it look like crap, but at least be quiet. I don't think he's fixed that yet. I don't think he's figured out exactly the right compromise there. But at least for the purposes of the video, he cranks the PWM up to 4,000 so that we don't have to suffer through the flicker.
One's easier to fix in post. Just mute the audio.
Anyway, it's a really cool project. It's still ongoing. He's at 7 videos now. I don't know how many he's going to go to before he's happy. I'm guessing if you watch the videos or you look at the project, it seems like it's like 80% done, but that means I guess it's 20% done.
Yeah, right. They always seem 80%.
I have faith in him. I guess it's maybe 50.
I'm surrounded by 80% projects that are
20%.
No closer now than they ever have been to getting finished. So one of my favorite ones from this week is an epic quest to build the ultimate Game Boy, and I think you have to be, this high to ride to really get this one. Because the whole idea is that, the original Game Boy is like a brick with buttons on it. Like, the screen sucks, and It's not very powerful in compared to the other systems that were out around the same time, but it's still like if you had it, if this is what you kind of came up with, you have this like unending love of the original Game Boy. Bucket Mouse is such a lover of the original and has been on this quest for like 2 years now. We've covered it at least for that long, where he's continuously improving the internals of the Game Boy Color is the first thing, but then play the newer games like the Game Boy Color games and all kinds of modernization. Like there's a improved voltage regulator in there that's higher efficiency, so you get even more runtime out of the AA's and all that kind of stuff. While still externally, if it wasn't on and you didn't see the color screen, you would, think it was still a legit original Game Boy. And, we've seen a lot of Game Boy hacks, and I think it's, fascinating that here we are 30 odd years, pushing 40, I guess, right? And they just don't seem to be slowing down. Like, they're just, if anything, they're getting better. I think as the technology improves, they have these drop-in IPS screens now that you can put in, and which he uses in this build, and it looks phenomenal. I mean, the main picture is the same game running on a legit original one, and that's sickening green dot matrix versus this new IPS, and it's like literal night and day. The one thing that I think might be surprising if you're looking at this project is that he did decide to stick with the AA's, like I said, instead of going with something internal and rechargeable. I've actually talked to him a little bit about the project. He's been on the Hackaday Discord server dropping us little updates for a while now and kind of chatting with people. And he really did want to preserve that feel of just like grabbing 4 batteries, or slamming it in there. And he thought that a rechargeable thing would kind of take the magic out of it. Like it really was, the goal was really to make it like it was a real game. I mean, you could even, like the link port still works, even though like who's he playing? Who's he playing these games with, right? Like, but he still went through the trouble, like, make sure the link port works, and it is literally, the link port salvaged off the original Game Boy PCB that he's now put on, this new PCB. So, like, every effort was made to make it as legit as possible, including the maybe, to modernize outdated batteries, but, well, he was selling the boards on Etsy, just the PCBs, and he was talking about maybe making this a kit, because I think that there's certainly demand for this. And I know also that people are always asking him, like, can you build me one? Can you build me one? Like, so this might be something that actually ends up being a kit that you could drop into your old school Game Boy and modernize it a little bit.
Yeah, the Game Boy is like, first of all, it's iconic. Second of all, you're right. It has seen this like amazing renaissance in people hacking for it. There are Game Boy programming dev environments that you can use to like write your own games, and like there's this whole modding scene like this would fall into. I guess I didn't realize how impressive it was from a programming aspect, from a hardware, from a design aspect until fairly recently. And if you want to see the ultimate Game Boy talk, I'll throw the links in the show notes. It is really the ultimate Game Boy talk. It is absolutely fantastic. It's Michael Steil giving a talk at Chaos Communication Congress 33, so 2016, describes the Game Boy down to the registers, but also you can get the feel for the high-level overview all at the same time. And if you don't understand what the point of hacking on a Game Boy is in 2022, you should watch this video and you will get it.
I think that talk is going to be one of the most referenced older articles, because I know we've definitely linked to it in another podcast episode. That might be like second to like the Tamagotchi singularity thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of those things that like even though years later you just keep going, hey, just go back because nobody's done better, and just check it out. But I think I should say, I don't think I did it justice maybe in my original description. These are open source replacement PCBs. I think there's 4 boards inside the Game Boy. But it does use legit Game Boy hardware too. It's not like a Raspberry Pi, which is, we've seen those too, and that's honestly kind of cool. But this is a legit Game Boy, to the point that you will, if you want to do this on your own, you have to get a Game Boy Color and pull the CPU and the RAM off of it to then transplant onto this new board. So, I mean, this is not a weekend project by any stretch of the imagination. Like, you really need to be dedicated. It's like I said, maybe he would turn this into a kit, although, I guess for every kit sold, you got to tear apart a Game Boy Color, which is kind of unfortunate.
But if it works, you get a Game Boy Color out of it.
That's true. That's true.
It's not like the world is minus a Game Boy Color.
Right. And we're certainly not short of Game Boys. I mean, 100 million or something crazy they made. One of the most mass-produced gaming systems ever. I linked in the show notes the previous kind of versions of this. There was one point earlier, I think last year, or maybe even earlier than that, where Bucket Mouse had literally taken a Game Boy Color motherboard and just kind of shoehorned it in there and like wired all the buttons to their appropriate parts, and that worked. But it wasn't something you wanted to show off. There was a lot of hot glue to be had and that sort of thing. And even prior to that, he did it with a Game Boy Advance SP motherboard, which was cool because it's very small. It's much smaller than the other boards, but then that cartridge interface was different, so that it was easier on one hand and harder on a different one. So it's been cool to see this for at least probably since COVID. I think this was his COVID quest, right?
You got it.
It's been cool to see all the different versions of this and reaching this final version, which I would say is the ultimate. I don't think you can go. I don't know what else you could do out of this. And actually, I know he is working on another project. He did mention it to me, but I won't reveal anything. He's moved on to a new system. I'll just say that.
Ooh.
Keep an eye out for his latest conquest.
Tantalizing. All right, my next hack comes to us from HSGW. The article was written up, by me. The title is The Whole Thing in Python, and this is a project to make a macro pad entirely in Python. And we don't mean just the firmware, we mean the schematic capture uses a Python tool. The PCB layout uses a Python software tool. The CAD for the case uses a Python software tool. This is essentially an entirely software-defined physical device. Oh yeah, the firmware is written in Python too. This is a really neat proof of concept, basically, of how far you can push a code-based flow into hardware. And a lot of us are used to, for instance, OpenSCAD for 3D design. Some others of us are kind of familiar with hardware design languages. So if you've done work with FPGAs before, you're kind of writing code that then a synthesis tools put into real lookup tables and it turns into hardware in the end. So it's not entirely foreign, but I didn't really know most of these tools before, and I thought that was what was really interesting about this, is it's kind of introducing this alternate reality PCB design toolchain to us. It's all done, of course, in a Python Jupyter notebook, so the whole thing, including the PCB design, is in a Jupyter notebook, which I think is sweet. It starts off defining the net list and doing the schematic capture using Skiddle. And this actually looks really neat and really usable to me. Basically, you kind of define the parts, you say what pins they've got, and you say how you want them hooked up. If you're not doing any analog circuit design, your circuit diagrams basically just look like a list of this pin's connected to that pin anyway. In that sense, something like Skiddle makes a lot of sense, right? You have libraries of predefined parts and you just have to tell it how to hook them together. In the middle is this layout tool, PCB flow, which is a derivative of a previous one, CU flow, copper flow. And this is where things get a little bit trickier. What's neat about this is it uses KiCad footprints and then this kind of weird, almost turtle-esque scripting language to show where the traces go between them. And I think that's where I personally would have the most trouble making a board with this project. I'll talk more about this later, I think. I have a lot to say about code design of real things. But then the last step is doing the CAD design for the case in CAD Query, which is a really neat Python OpenSCAD like 3D design language. And we've written Hackaday articles about it before, but I'd never really taken a deep dive into it until looking at this project. And it actually looks really neat. It kind of solves some of the things that are annoying when you're working with OpenSCAD, like attaching another shape to a face of an existing shape. This thing has kind of a work planes like workflow to it. And I think that's actually kind of interesting. So you can define an object and then you can say, treat this face as a workplace and then put your next object on that. And that looks kind of sweet. It's a lot like the way a lot of, mouse around CAD programs work, except this is all in Python code. I think I'm going to have to dig into that. Maybe that'll be one of my New Year's resolutions. Is to learn a new 3D programming language.
No, I mean, I'm with you. I love the idea that you can go from source code to a physical object. I don't need to tell you that you're as a fellow OpenSCAD fan. I think it's crazy that you can git commit something that can be also in your hand.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see that extended to, like you said, like the ultimate. This does remind me. We talked about it on the last time I was on the podcast. There was another PCB tool that we saw that was from code. I appreciate somebody out there pushing the envelope here, and this brave new world where you could have the entire object in a GitHub repository. It's kind of like the dream, right? Like that we could, outside like the couple modules and whatever, like the key switches and stuff like that, like the jelly bean stuff, that you could really have open hardware that is just, you just pull it down from a server and you just replicate it on your home machines, or even if you have to get the board sent out. Like it's really cool to see that we've come to this point. And yeah, you could argue it's kind of a simplistic example, but you got to start somewhere, right? And I think this is a really cool indicator of the shape of things to come. I think we're only going to see more of this, at least from the people who are dedicated to actually making open hardware, right? Like more accessible to the point that I could give you a zip archive with everything you need to recreate your own copy of what I built. Like that's pretty cool.
You said I'm a huge OpenSCAD fan, and of course that's true. But I'm also a horses for courses. I also use FreeCAD a lot when I need to do, the cliche is kind of when you need to do something, organic shapes, or where you don't really care about the sizes or whatever. The real truth is that I appreciate OpenSCAD for all the things that code brings. Like, you can put all of the parts of it that you'd like to customize up at the top in a header, and then it's really easy to just change them. The values, you need to change to personalize it to fit your particular case are up in the top 10 lines of code, and where it says 10 millimeters, you just type in 12, and then boom, the thing recomputes itself. And that, plus the kind of reusing of modules, like you actually introduced me, I think, to NOPSCAD lid via Hackaday. And I just love that, because when I need a stepper motor plate in my design, I just type include, and then boom, there it is. And those are kind of the virtues of code. And the other one I think that Skittle and PCB Flow are aimed at is it's much easier to iterate over things in code. And so if you have this design that has a fan out with 1,000 pins on it, you do not want to route all of these by hand. It's, it only makes sense to have a computer do this for loop for you. These kind of things, I think, are kind of the natural domain of code. So that's kind of the kinds of projects where they make the most sense. Although, and this is what I think is really cool about these, at least Skittle and PCB Flow, that is the design capture and the layout one, also kind of interoperate with KiCad. So if you've got a part of it that you want to automate, right? Like if you have this giant fan out that you want to automate, and it's easier to do it in PCB Flow, you can do that and then pull it into KiCad and do the stuff that you need to do manual routing for on that side. I think even if you're not interested in doing a fully code flow, the ability to integrate this fully code flow into the normal tool chain is also going to be super powerful. And then you can do the programmatic stuff where the programmatic stuff makes most sense, and then bring that in and then tweak it up like you need it. That, I think, is a really cool future for this.
The other project is SVG PCB. It was used in the flexible crown that we talked about
Yeah, that's right.
3 or 4 episodes ago. And yeah, it's a web-based thing where you use very open SCAD-looking code to describe the PCB. So it's cool that there's multiple options out there if you're looking to do something like this.
Yeah, and again, I think there will be these niche cases where when you have it, you'll be super glad that tools like this exist, and now you know about them.
All right, my next one I picked for personal selfish reasons, as is my wont. I think I mentioned in one of the other episodes I've kind of been on this 6502 kick thanks to the SuperCon badge that showed me the joys of programming on bare metal. So I mission accomplished for you. he got me. Got me hooked.
One at least. One of them's hooked.
So I've been had my eye out for a lot of 6502 projects, and had Dan not written this one up, I was going to do it that night. So this is a minimalist 6502 on a single breadboard. Breadboard 6502 computers aren't anything new. Ben Eater has obviously done his huge thing. It's kind of been inspiration for most of these. This is the smallest, I guess you'd say, and most compact version. And the trick is that it's not technically a 6502 at all. It's actually using the 6507, which is a cheaper reduced pin count variant of the 6502. So whereas the original is 40 pins and all of its little friends are mainly 40 pins, so they can be wired together, this is a 28 pin version. And that means right off the bat you can only address 8K, and I think you lose like the interrupts or something. But at the time when it came out, that was seen as a real that's fine. To get the price down, like
Cheap enough.
Who needs more than 8K, right? It'll be fine. We'll roll with it. So right off the bat, he's using the 6507 to almost cut the pin count in half. But the real trick comes from the RAM IO timer combination chip, or Riot, which is the 6532, which includes your IO in there. It has a timer, and it has a little bit of RAM, just enough RAM to make itself useful. So that means you don't need the whole dedicated RAM chip like you would normally. And now you're down to effectively 6507, the ROM where your code lives, and then this Riot chip. And you need, of course, the little passives and a crystal and that kind of thing. But you're down to like, this is the bare minimum. Like, I suppose the Anders Nielsen who put it together in the video does say that like technically you could have just the 6507 and a ROM if all you wanted to do was blink an LED or something. But this is this has got to be the minimum for a useful implementation that can actually run the same code that the 6502 runs. So that's just a really cool design, and if you're looking for the easiest way to actually get your feet wet, this is probably the one.
What's really cool about this one is that a few people come up in the comment section and mention that exactly this chip combo was what Atari used for the 2600.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. Yeah,
I didn't know that at all. He doesn't mention it, but apparently the cut down 6502, the 6507, and the Riot chip were basically the backbone of the Atari 2600. So this is not, it's not totally revolutionary to pair these things together. They were designed for each other. But it is awesome that by using them, you can get the pin count down to fit it on a breadboard.
Yeah, same thing. I saw that too, and then I immediately was like, is that true? It's like, because I always thought the Atari was 6502, right? So I looked it up, and yeah, sure enough, they said that they had the 6502 was unveiled, and like that day, they met to all right, we want to make a game console, and they said that the best they could do is like $25 a chip, which back then was ridiculous. And they said no, we can't. How can you make a game system where just the one chip is $25? So they're like, okay, well, we got this other one. And I think they did that for $12 or something, and that was what let the Atari 2600 work. And in that application, it was fine. Like, okay, there's a little less address space, and they didn't need the extra features. So yeah, like you said, this is not some rare thing. In fact, if you look at it that way, it's an extremely popular use of the chip,
right?
Because how many millions of Atari 2600s were out there? And I'm looking at the picture of the Atari 2600 board now. It's actually remarkably small.
Yeah.
It's not much more than the cartridge slot and some big honking capacitors and the 3 chips.
My last hack this week is one near and dear to my heart, a homebrew SMD device built from scrap wood by Ollie Krause. And this is a really simple hack. It's really just a couple pieces of wood with some notches cut in them to hold the PCB, and then a pin, an adjustable pin on an L bracket. And all of these are kind of magneted down to a base plate. The pin holds down SMD parts for you to solder them. And this kind of, do-it-yourself, holding your PCBs together while you solder them solutions is, of course, something that we all face all the time, at least those of us who don't work in a professional environment. I just think that all of these different kind of hack-together solutions are really awesome to know and talk about and trade our tips and tricks with each other. And this one looks particularly interesting to me. The discussion on this one in the comments is totally worth looking at. There's some really good points made by Comedicles and then Paul VDH, who come in and say, look, you can do this yourself by just kind of rubber banding a popsicle stick into a pair of pliers, and then you lean it over on the part. So you can hold down SMD parts with just gravity. And indeed, in this very article, Al links out to the SMD Beak, which was a SMD soldering help device that was made out of metal, but also just kind of rests on the table and puts a little weight through a point on the piece that you're soldering so that it doesn't wiggle around. I've tried them all out. Like I said, I'm totally a fan of these and like probe holders. I have a stick vise, I have a pana vise, I have, of course, the traditional helping hands. And I actually do the Paul VDH plier trick with my helping hands. I will put something pointy in the jaw of the helping hands, and then I'll lean it over onto the part so that it points down on it, doing exactly the same thing. Or the beak tip, it's the same hack. Proto G, I got turned on to dial gauge holders, like the machinist gauge things, and built some stands for those. Those are really nice because they got a spring with adjustable tension in them, so you can kind of put the probe up against your part and then dial it till it's pressing down with just the right pressure. So there's a whole bunch of ways here. How do you do PCB assembly?
Part of it involves looking on the floor for the part I dropped.
Yeah.
And then getting really mad. But no, I got at least some of your illustrious list of devices myself. And it never seems to go as well as I hope, right? Like, just looking at this picture, like this looks good. This is like just holding down a single part with that little point. I definitely am a little envious of this setup, so I might have to find some scrap wood of my own. Which I also think was kind of an interesting point. Al Williams in the write up mentions like that we don't see a lot of wood on Hackaday, which is true. And it's funny because if I was going to do this, I immediately would be in OpenSCAD and I'd be planning out these little grips and I'd print them, and it would take me hours. And meanwhile, these are just two pieces of wood with like little notches in them. It might took 2 minutes.
Glue a magnet on. That takes you another 2 minutes. You're at 5 minutes now.
Maybe sometimes it would be good to take a step back and look at the less high-tech approach. Plus, the printed ones would melt at some point when an errant soldering iron. These wood ones are. I mean, if you screw up bad enough to set it on fire, then I think the board you're working on is the least of your trouble, right?
You're doing it wrong. Yeah, right.
Everything is wrong. Smells like chicken. You're holding it wrong, right?
Yep. I guess they don't mention my kind of favorite tricks here, which is really just to hold the SMD part with tweezers and tack the one side down, right? So you like pre-tin the one side.
Like that's...
And then you ease it up on there, and then you don't need anything holding it down. Some people in the comments were like, yeah, you can do that, but if your hands are too shaky for that, you might mess it up as you're doing it. And I can hear that, and that may be a reason to do the, like, hold this down with a beak kind of thing. I'm also a super big fan of the traditional holding hands. Like I said, I use them to lean over on parts. I'm pretty good at even just soldering two wires together in midair using holding hands. I've been using them so long for such fiddly stuff. It's like second nature to me. But I understand that a lot of other people like more sophisticated gear for those kind of tasks. And that's cool too, right? Anyway, this is great stuff. If you have particular tips or tricks for SMD soldering, head on over to the comments and add your own 2 cents to this one, and we'll all thank you.
All right, and my last one, I almost didn't pick this because it's kind of two retro computer things. This is an update to the NABU set-top computer, whatever you want to call it, that we covered a few episodes ago. So I felt at least need to, bring the story full circle. I guess it was like an early attempt at doing a smart TV kind of deal where your cable company provided box would be able to pull stuff down and you see the news and the weather and all that kind of stuff, except it was in the 80s and it was a giant Z80 machine that was supposed to go under your TV. It folded or something happened, and there was thousands of these things sitting in a warehouse, which were recently uncovered, and the whole retro computing world was all abuzz because, at least at the time, I think they were selling them for like $15. I don't think you can get one for $15 anymore. I think we've ruined that. I'm sorry. Last time I saw them on eBay, they were going $50-$60. I mean, it's a brand, like how often, I think it says in the write-up, how often do you see a brand new, never before used Z80 computer in its original packaging? Like, here you go, here's $50. Like, I've gone to, a couple of the vintage computer festivals, and I tell you what, they are commanding some numbers, those old machines. Like, even the most beat TRS 80, they're like, best I could do is like $100. Like, didn't even have a keyboard. There's a lot of excitement about trying to take these cheap old set-top boxes and turn them into, multi-purpose retro computers, because as it stands now, that just comes up and says, my Canadian telecom thing isn't working. And this is a step forward to that, although a little bit of a sidestep, perhaps, because this is actually taking the Z80 out of the NABU and replacing it with a teensy microcontroller that is emulating a Z80. And at first glance, that might seem like a strange thing to do. But the idea is that if you control the CPU completely, you can do a lot of other stuff easier. It's, you can take over the machine, for lack of a better word, more expeditiously. So while there's still research going on to make the NABU this like general purpose computer, in the meantime, this is like an easy way to actually get, basic running on it. And that's what the article is about. There are some weird things, like the NABU has a 40 by 24 display, whereas like the TRS-80 is 64 by 16. In this case, Ted, who is working on this, just says, well, screw it. we won't worry about those 24 characters. Like, there's no fancy hack here. Like, there's the characters just go off to the right side of the screen. He said, don't worry about it. It's fine. Most basic programs, the line's not that long, I guess. So it's literally just don't worry about it. And to address the vertical resolution difference, like the NABU logo just stays on the screen the whole time. So like how much RAM, little questions when basic starts just appear under the logo. But hey, it's, proof of concept, and it's getting basic running on this thing, so it's pretty cool. It's also interesting, like we say this all the time, like some of the coolest stuff comes from the comments. Some of the comments talk about sort of the state of the art of hacking these NABUs now, and it sounds like someone has like an emulator for the server side that you can run on your own computer.
Nice.
And then if you do like USB to coax, which apparently is a thing, you could be the service provider for the NABU, and it could say, oh, here you are. It'll actually wake up and do some of the functions it was supposed to. So there's some hope that, the whole server side could be developed, and then like unmodified hardware could show, its original menu, which would let it do all the stuff. And that could be pretty cool if you didn't want to fiddle with the hardware itself. And then other people are saying, well, there's, they're working on custom firmwares for them, and, there's a couple of competing projects there. So this write-up, it starts about swapping the chip, which, like I said, is sort of a sidestep. But it's also kind of a cool collecting point for a lot of, like, the latest news in the NABU world, which is something I know that a lot of people have been interested in.
My first quick hack this week comes from Les of the YouTube channel Les's Lab. He is a laser freak, and this one is a white light laser on the cheap. This is a demonstration of making a super continuum laser. He takes a really long length of fiber optic cable, puts a blue laser pulse in one end, and all sorts of funny nonlinear effects in this very long cable spread the light out, and he gets a full spectrum laser out on the other side. Really cool science experiment and a great deep dive into some cool laser topics. Next up, Ed Musa. Stewart Platform keeps its eye on the ball. This is a classic, like, PID trainer video object recognition hack. He's actually 3D printed himself a red ping pong ball and uses overhead camera tracking and some software to balance it no matter what he does with it. He has a great video on the PD tuning that he did to make this work, but also check out the other videos on his channel. He's got some really cool looking 3D printed robot actuators, a nice compliant servo design. Actually, all of this is also up on Hackaday.io under the username Printed Gadgets. And last up, Jeff G, the Crawl Space Crawler. This is a really simple crawler FPV robot. He built it in this case to go under his crawl space because he was tired of scooting around down there himself looking for like leaks in the pipes under his house or whatever. Now he does it in style with a remote controlled robot and a video camera. Fairly simple, but it really makes you think you could do it yourself. He gives you all these little tips and tricks that will help make yours a success instead of getting it caught somewhere under the joists in your house. And then you have to crawl down there anyway.
Comments on that one got me watching the dude with the Klein bottles under his house.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic
The
video.
little forklift. That was so cool.
Dude, that is so awesome. But it actually looks like it's a little warehouse under. That's so cool.
Oh, yeah. Once it like goes outside of like visual range and he switches over to camera, like you could definitely believe it's a full-scale warehouse.
It was in the Amazon warehouse or something under Cliff Stahl's house. Yeah, that dude's a nutter. That's awesome.
My first quick hack is machine learning makes sure your LOLs are genuine. I think we all have gotten into the habit of typing LOL more often than we are literally laughing on the floor. What is it? Laughing out loud?
Laughing out loud.
Yeah, yes, whatever. We all just kind of put LOL, but do we all really laugh out loud when we do it? No. So this device by Brian Moore literally verifies that you are laughing out loud through the use of machine learning and a extensively trained model, which apparently took 2 to 3 minutes. I think it says in the video. Is Teensy operating as a human interface device, and once you've sufficiently laughed for it, it will type LOL for you. So it's actually a twofer because you don't have to type it out yourself. My next one is SuperCon 2022 badge. Gets a Tinkering Helper add-on, and I had to pick this one because I think it's so cool that people are still playing with the badge, right? Like that was the goal when you give them these things, is to provide a long-term value, whether it's a challenge or just a novelty. And I love that BrokeBit is out there still making hardware to plug into the badge. Specifically this one, because it kind of fixes an issue that we sort of ran into during SuperCon, in that not all of the USB serial adapters played nice with the hardware. So this takes a known good UART chip, puts it on a board, adds a couple switches for input and output and some LEDs, and it's kind of just like a one-stop little solution that you can plug into the top of the badge. Makes it easier to program, and still is a pass-through, so you can plug other hardware into it. So it's a really cool idea. If we ever put the badges out again, maybe we'll have to get some of these made too. My last one is fool a drone with a fixed battery. Now, I didn't know, I've never actually owned one, but apparently the DJI drones all have chipped batteries, which sucks. Like a printer cartridge, right? That tells you, oh, sorry, you're using the wrong battery, that sort of thing. Even to the point that if you try to change the cells in one of these batteries, the battery management chip will tell the drone not to use it, which is next level battery troll. So you can't even, get your old packs and put new cells in them. So the idea here from Zolly is a way to trick that. And basically the short version is there's serial communication happening between the battery management system and the drone, and if you kind of cut the line at the proper moment, the battery never tells the drone that, hey, something's wrong. He hasn't fooled the battery, it's just kind of gagging it so it can't tell them that something's going wrong. There's also a little bit of suspect wiring going on here because you have to cut the balance lines to make it all work, and so now you have to start charging it with an external charger, or else the angry pixies will come out. So it definitely isn't something that the average DJI owner should be doing, but it is at least a solution for the advanced user to get around the chipped battery problem, or at least one aspect of the chipped battery problem.
All right, and that brings us to our can't miss articles, long form pieces written by our Hackaday staff. And this week, I'd like to focus on Tom Nardi's 2022 as the hardware world turns. So this is our chance to do our year in review retrospective. Tell me about it, Tom.
It's tricky. It's tricky to find the big stories, and you can never do all of them, of course. You're always going to miss something, but I do like to, we talked about it a couple times in like little behind the scenes meetings. We kind of get all the writers together and be like, what really stood out in your mind, good or bad. And, obviously the first one was the chip shortage. Like, that's sort of on everybody's mind right now. And really specifically, I think for like our readers is the Raspberry Pi situation. There's all kinds of stuff you can't get, or at least can't get at the proper price, like STM32s and that kind of stuff. And I would say that's more maybe for the advanced players, but I think everybody's burned by not being able to get Raspberry Pis. Like, no matter where you are on the spectrum of making stuff, you probably have a Raspberry Pi or two and would like to get a new one because they're always, faster and smaller, and it's just not really possible because there's so few of them out there, and the ones that are out there are selling for insane prices, and that sucks. It does suck. But I think what is maybe calling a silver lining might be strong, but I think what's been interesting is to see that without the Raspberry Pi, which frankly we've all become really jaded by this cheap, super well documented, convenient Linux board. I mean, before that, what it was like before the Raspberry Pi. It was like the Wild West, of even, you had gum sticks and all kinds of silly little embedded boards, and they were expensive and a hassle. And
we had to use computers for computers back then.
Yeah, right. Yeah, full-size computers. So, it really was transformative to have the Raspberry Pi, and we've become used to it, So, in its absence, we've had to kind of go back to the old ways, like you said. People are starting to pick up old x86 machines on like eBay and using them. Of course, the state of the art in small x86 machines has progressed quite a bit, so you can actually get a pretty tiny and relatively energy efficient box for not a lot. Certainly less than what Pis are going for right now. And, that's kind of interesting because a lot of these applications that you see the Pi being used for can certainly be done by a regular computer. We became so used to this, but I'll just buy a Pi and use that, where, it wasn't really necessary. Like, unless you're using some of the interface on the Pi, you didn't really need that. It was just convenient. So it's been kind of interesting to see that come full circle and people using, actual computers for computing.
Yeah. I've always been kind of a parts scrounger and, reusing chips and reusing things just for the fun of it, right? Just because I like garbage hacking, truthfully. But now that there's this chip shortage, and some people have been doing that not just out of pure fun, but actually out of necessity, it really is striking how we've kind of fallen into this Mad Max world where we're like gutting the remains of our old society to make our new devices. And I kind of, what am I going to say? You don't want to see people pushed into this, but like you point out in this article, some of the innovative ways that people got out of it are great to see just by themselves. It's weird to be living in the Mad Max dystopian future, but, as long as we're doing it, it's nice to see people doing it in style. And you did mention in this article the multiple footprints thing, and I've really enjoyed that. I remember before there was even a chip crisis, some friends of mine were designing boards with funny multiple footprints that would let you put in basically whatever size SMD passives you want. So, it's a single footprint that fits like 0603s up to 1206s. And so, whatever size part you have on hand, you don't have to look in your parts bin first or special order the parts. You just design with these footprints, and then whatever you happen to have in the closet will fit. Those kind of tricks are really great for the one-offs, prototypers, hacker-type developers. It's weird to see having to design multiple footprints because you don't know what parts you can get, even if you are ordering them. But like, some of us have been doing this because we're just too lazy to go over to the closet and see what size we've got 100 ohm resistors in.
Well, and also, like I said in the article, there are people who don't have the access that we do to parts. Even in the best scenarios, they can't just jump on DigiKey and order the exact part. And, so this kind of salvage mentality in some places of the world is just business as usual. We're crying because we can't get our cheap Raspberry Pis. But, I mean, there's places where Amazon Prime don't come here.
Right.
You need to work with what you have, and I think we could all stand to learn a lesson from that. And like you said, the multiple footprint thing is really cool. I linked to another project. It's a floppy controller I wrote up over the summer. That the bill of materials had this is the ideal chip, and then these are the 5 you could use, and they're kind of ordered in like what you're gonna lose, with each one, because all right, if you get this one, well, you can't do this, can't do that, but you can do this, and it was really cool to see that that documentation. I mean, it's a lot to ask for that kind of documentation for everything, but it was really cool that it was like, okay, if you can't get this, here's like your 4 options, and depending on what you need, these are the ones that will or will not work. So I do think even when things settle down, it would probably not be the worst if we kept some of those lessons. A little bit like how, I think that events will never go, there'll always still be a virtual, after, the COVID lockdowns, I think there always will be a virtual aspect to these hacker events, because people saw that, okay, yeah, the virtual event was not ideal, but it had some advantages, and nobody really wants to go back. Right. So I think this might be one of those lessons learned during hardship that we all kind of keep in mind going forward, even when things improve.
I agree with you full-heartedly there. Thinking about this as a Mad Max dystopia, I got me thinking about something we didn't put on this list here, and of all people to not put it on the list, you, Tom Nardi, forgot that 2022 was kind of the year of the cyberdeck. I mean, this was the year that the cyberdecks really hit on Hackaday. And, we ran the cyberdeck challenge, and it was tremendously well received. But we were just doing that because people were building so many, and so many cool ones. And so I think that was one of the big stories of 2022 that, at least the Hackaday version of the universe was really deeply affected by.
And plays directly, like I said, into that salvaging parts. A lot of those builds are using old laptop displays with little generic driver boards, or they're using whatever. They're built into the case of some other thing. They are the salvaged, pull it out of the garbage and make it work thing is a big part of the cyberdeck mystique. Whether practical aesthetic. Or otherwise. Yeah, it's good. Well, you always think of the things you should have put in.
Oh, yeah.
Right at the end, I was like, oh, yeah, I should have said that. And then, one of the other things, which, I kind of struggled with at first because it's not even a hardware thing, but it's just so big right now, you can't avoid these AI assistants, especially, Chat GPT, right now is exploding because, when you actually look into it, so much of this stuff has actually happened, in the last couple months. This is, talk about, cutting edge stuff. 2022 was, again, the year that really became a thing. You see mentions of it in, 2021 where they were working on these things, but they were all closed up and they're in alpha, and you couldn't, it wasn't for the public. But this is the year where everybody decided to say, hey, let's open it up to the normies and see what kind of stuff they can make. And, it started with the art things and generating the images and the write-up. I used Dolly I put realistic hardware hacker reading their favorite website, and I'll be damned if it doesn't look really good. A quick glance, it really does seem like it's a picture of somebody, this could be any of you. If you if any of you saw this and thought it was you, please let us know in the comments.
Right.
But then when you start looking at it closely, the tools are weird, misshapen little potatoes, and the parts are just colors that sort of look like PCBs, and the details fall apart.
The front of the LCD screen is facing the audience and not the person looking at it.
Yeah, right.
If you look through the glasses, the face is horribly distorted underneath because it doesn't know optics. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that kind of leads into the next problem is if you're doing images and these kind of weird uncanny valley things, all right, whatever, you can kind of ignore it. But now we're starting to see people try to develop source code with this software, or they're trying to use it to learn. I saw somebody, I think it was on Reddit or something, they said, oh, Chat GPT is great because now instead of having to go on Stack Overflow and ask an embarrassing question, a beginner question, I can go on there and get the answer. And it was like, no.
I can go there and get a wrong answer?
The last person you should be taking advice from is the not a person, right? Like it is a mindless computer that is just spitting out, permutations of things that it learned. And in many cases, it's very impressive. And it might even get you 80, 90% of the way to the answer. But it's like, you can't take it, at face value. You have to give it that human touch. And
it is literally taking this gigantic data set and kind of averaging over it and giving you this average response back. And a lot of the time it's right, but there's no guarantee it's going to be.
2022 is also the year of GitHub Copilot, which is Microsoft's ultimate long con to take open source software and pervert it, because here they have a paid product that will take chunks of open source code and drop them into your project without crediting the original author or explaining that it's open source in the first place. Inevitably, they are currently in a class action lawsuit for that. But it's very gray area because, Microsoft, they argue that they're like inspired works. They're not the exact same, which is wrong in a few cases, because there has been cases where it literally has taken, a verbatim chunk and like bloop, but they say that's like a training anomaly and that's gonna, they'll get filtered out. And the other stuff is maybe strongly inspired by, but not literally copied. So it's a really tricky gray area. But yeah, I mean, it's not hard to see why a lot of people are mad. Like you imagine, you put your open source project out there on GitHub, then Microsoft comes around, scans it, and starts suggesting your code to proprietary developers. So that's fun.
And that's going to be an interesting, horrible legal challenge. And, I'm still torn on this issue because part of me thinks that this is a misappropriation of the license and of the code, right? And it certainly kind of defeats the spirit of it on that sense, especially if you're a GPLE type, Stallman-y type. On the other hand, if you're I wrote this code and I'm sharing it so that humanity can profit from it and I don't care what they do with it, then of course this is totally in line with it. And so if you're an Apache or MIT license kind of guy, then this is like the ideal use of your code. And so I think it's pointing out a split in the open software community.
That's a good point.
It's also really divisive because of the particular company that's doing it and because of the perceived, although I think incorrectly perceived, threat to people's jobs. Like a lot of the graphic artists complaining about this put their stuff up on free websites like ArtStation and stuff so that other people could see them and use them. And now they're complaining that the AI is making art in their style. And it's this duality, right? Like they were doing it so that other people could be inspired by them, but they don't want a machine to be inspired by them. And like... and I hear it. I feel it. Like this is going to be the big dilemma in the next 5 years, 10 years, and we as a society are going to have to figure out how we feel about it. And I think I don't know. I think anyone who's thought hard about it is as confused as I am.
Well, I think it wouldn't be such a big problem if it wasn't for the fact that this is really awesome stuff, and we desperately want this ability. Like this is the Star Trek thing where you're like, hey computer, just do this thing for me, and it figures it out. Like we all want this, right? But we're gonna have to navigate the logistics of it.
But because of the startup costs involved in this stuff, it's like exclusive to these like mega rich corporations, right? Like to train GPT cost how many hundreds of millions of dollars? Like this isn't something that you're gonna do. You can use it yourself, and they'll let you use it, and they're not charging a fee yet, but they will. As soon as they're done collecting our sweet, sweet training data that we're giving them by using their service for free, when they start charging for it, they are going to have to try to make their hundreds of millions of dollars of money back. And, my cynical kind of anti-capitalist side says that's a bad thing. And if we are somehow feeding into this by creating and sharing public information, then screw those clowns. But I can't stop writing for Hackaday just because we're unintentionally training the evil AIs run by, multi-million dollar monopolist anti-consumer companies. What am I going to do? What am I going to do?
I don't know. Yeah.
It's the world.
This Mad Max world we're living. I was talking to somebody who is experimenting with getting ChatGPT to make KiCad footprints. And just say, hey, make me a footprint for this part. And it doesn't work really well, but like
such a bad idea.
Got to the point, but we're
Please
also
don't do that.
the baby rattle stage of this technology. In the future, if you can count on it to do these things reliably, it'd be a huge time save.
I don't even trust other humans' footprints. Who's going to trust some robot's footprints? Please. That wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to comment or follow any of the links, head on over to the show notes, hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, write us at tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking. Beep, 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 beep.
Nice timing.
But I'm Tom Nardi. Man, god damn it, forgot the first line I had to say.
That's the one, though. If I say that here and then I do the episode number, oh well, whatever.
Starting to do you right.
You have some noise in your background? Do you have a bird singing? Or
I do not have a bird. Yeah, it is a Peppa Pig watching some nonsense with eagles. My last one. Where's my last one?